Alright, hood's open. Welcome back. We're going to focus on the big four. Okay, guys? That's what we're focusing on today. Upgrading your power and ground on your Nissan D21 to help aid in a good grounding system for your factory and stock electrical, which means your alternator, giving it a good ground, and a way to keep your aftermarket battery, your stock battery, charged up nice and healthy throughout the seasons, hot, cold, or not, and bad weather, etc. And most of us, either we have an aftermarket radio or we don't. And for the ones that kind of go media core, where you put at least a nice little sound system in there, it's also good to upgrade your power and ground, because basically you're going to be pulling a little bit more amps, a little bit more, basically amps. Volts are always going to be the same unless you run a 14.4 volt system, which would be a separate battery, and that would be wired up differently. But this is all 12 volt, like if one battery, not a secondary battery, an inline fuse holder. But anyway, let me start from the beginning. So I upgraded my battery terminals. I ordered these on eBay, and just so you know, I'll put the links on the video after it's uploaded. These are 0 gauge battery terminals, right? They have 2 0 gauge and 2 8 gauge. That's why you have 1, 2, 3, 4. So a lot of versatility there. This one that runs, this is the positive side, this is the negative side. Normally on a positive negative battery, the negative is always slightly smaller than the positive. So therefore, when you order these terminals, one will come with a little sleeve. It's like a little sleeve with a cut in it, and that's so that way it'll take up a little bit more space when you put the terminal on there, so it can grasp the terminal a little tighter. Okay, that's all that's for. So yes, your terminals are always slightly, one's bigger, one's smaller. So what we do here on the positive side, right? One powers the inline fuse holder for my SCAR amp. SCAR amp that I have is a micro 5-channel amp, which only takes 8 gauge power and ground. So I ran a 0 gauge into 150 amp fuse holder, right? And the rest is 100% OFC copper, 8 gauge right into the amp. Then I have the ground, right? Don't worry, I'm going to talk about the 100% copper connectors that I'm using. Okay, those are those big old lugs. They're called lugs. You crimp them on there. You can buy a tool, or you can I compensate it by using a vice grips, and did when I crimped them, I did them at certain levels of tension with the vice grips until I got it to where it was where I needed it. Then I put a heat shrink over it and heat shrinked it. Anyway, so this one right here, right, since this only has 2 0 gauges, one for the alternator, one for the power, and then the other little ones, the little 8 gauges, were those factory, right? You see those little ones, they come off, they have plugs. Those come from the factory relays. That powers other items for your vehicle. Those are just quick disconnect plugs, but other than that, those wires go into the wire loom, into the relay box, or into your computer inside the cab. So I soldered those together. I twisted them together, and I used some solder and a soldering iron, and I ran them in the 8 gauge holes, so that way they receive power. Everybody's like, "Ooh, shit, what kind of Nissan connector is this?" Just cut the bitch off. Don't let it scare you. Twist those wires together, stick them in there, or solder them. If you have a soldering iron, some solder. If not, basically give yourself a lot of copper to twist up together and stick it in there until you tighten that little Allen head. So this one right here didn't have a place to go in here, because that's the factory Nissan 2 gauge power wire that comes from the starter. Yes, starters are directly hooked up to the battery. It's the starter solenoid that kicks, that actually fires up the starter to get it going. That's what takes the hit from the voltage, etc. It's just not a direct hit to the starter. So what I did was I crimped the lug on it, and I bent it, and I put it in the bolt system right there on the side. So that was quick thinking on my part. to make sure that I had my starter connected. I have one going to my alternator. This one right here goes to the alternator. You know, you got to trim that boot. You peel it back, and then it'll slide over that big old fat 0 gauge. All right, now that's the power side. And then you see this over here, that's ground. That one comes right over here to the ground. This 8 gauge goes to the back of the alternator. There's like a little 8mm nut on the a little bit further away on the back side of the alternator, past the alternator wire, the power wire. And therefore you can get a little I'll show you the lugs that I use. You'll connect that 8 gauge to that, giving it some extra ground other than being bolted on the alternator bracket that is bolted to the block of the motor. So basically you're really reinsuring all your grounds, okay? And then of course this one right here just snakes underneath like this, comes right here. At first I had it under here, it was under there, but I was like, that's too much. It's putting a lot of stress on those factory nuts. So basically I used a knife, I scraped some paint off, I scraped a little paint, and then I put the bolt down. Those are those factory Nissan grounds. I didn't modify those or anything, but the one with the yellow stripe on it, that's the factory 2 gauge ground that you always see that comes off here. It goes down, and then it's got like it has like a lug that clamps around it's clamped around the 2 gauge wire, the ground wire, and then it continues to go like this to the side of the head, right? They're all like that. All the Nissans have that shit, and that's fine. It's a badass ground. It's actually very heavy. It's 100% copper. They didn't mess around when they made that ground. Same thing with that power wire to the starter. It's 100% copper. It's very heavy, very robust. That's why I didn't use 0 gauge on it. I didn't have to. There was just no need. It's already got some badass shit there. Okay, so this one comes like this, right? You can see it goes under the intake pipe, boom, right to a lug, right? So that's the ground coming off the battery, grounding the chassis, or not the chassis, the block. But then we also have the other ground that goes down here, grounding this, the cab. I'm not going to call it the chassis because that's not the chassis. The chassis is the frame, okay? The part that your suspension and everything else is hooked up, that the actual cab sits on top. And then we come back here. If you ever look back there, guys, you have a little dental floss looking mesh wire, and it's ground. It usually gets dirty. It's very thin. It's not a very good ground. Anything than that wire is a better ground. Over the years, heat beats it up. It gets oily, it gets dirty. Vehicles don't always get washed. That's why it's a good thing to keep them washed, because over time, heat, corrosion, dirt, antifreeze explosions, battery explosions, acidic moisture that gets in the air, all that stuff baking under the hood of a vehicle will eat and corrode any kind of sealed plug that you have, not where it's sealed, but it makes its way on the inside and works its way into the copper male and female fittings. So that's why it's good to keep it clean. All right, JP Fuller, it's another reason why it's good to keep your motor, wash it every 3 months. I know a lot of you are scared to wash your motor because you think it's going to mess up your wires, your battery, your alternator, electronics. Bullshit. That's why it's grounded. That's why it's factory grounded, for these reasons. Yes, you can wash an alternator. It's going to get wet, and it will take 1 or 2 seconds after you start it. Once it starts to spin, it clears it out and it starts making juice. The rectifier, which is the actual internal regulator built into the back of the alternator, starts to regulate the charge that's going to your battery. So the minute your alternator is running, it's charging your battery. You're always at 12 or 13.7. We're going to say 13.7. I have a digital voltmeter that I stuck in my dash next to my hazards, because I always like to monitor my running voltage, because I have never replaced this alternator. It's 26 going on 27 years old. It whines, it hisses, and you know, I live in Texas, so it's fairly hot all the time. And when it's cold, but most of the time it's hot or humid or muggy. So these alternators take a beating. Heat kills electronics after a while. So that's why I put a digital readout to always make sure that it's spitting out the right voltage. It's not an amp meter, it's a voltmeter. Amperage, these alternators, since we have EFI, they're usually 70 amp, 70 to 75 or 80 amp. So they only go up anywhere from 5 to 10 amps when you're buying an alternator. I always say go with a higher amperage alternator, because anytime you upgrade it with some audio, aftermarket radio, maybe you have a little amplifier, you know, if you're not running a capacitor to back up the voltage spikes that an amplifier can pull at times. So when you're sitting at idle, and let's face it, when you're sitting at idle, your AC's running or your headlights are on, AC is not running or running, and it's nighttime and you got your system thumping or jamming or whatever, you're starting to pull not just voltage, but you're now pulling amps. Amps is current. That's the thing that your alternator does other than charge your battery. It's keeping the constant amp flow going. It's powering the EFI system, the computer, all the solenoids, all the electronics, all the sensors, everything that takes 12 volts. Each one of these items pulls at least 1 to 3 amps, maybe 5 amps, 7 or 10 amps. That's why when you open your little fuse box and you look at your little fuses, you'll see 5, 7.5, 10, 15, or 20, maybe 25. 25 is that's a lot of amps. But then again, you have to think, you know, that's what all the wiring in your stock vehicle, the thickness of the wire, the actual consistency of the materials used, like if it's copper or copper clad. Copper clad sucks. You just don't see copper clad in vehicles. So when you strip little wires, you see real copper wire. Copper wire will basically transfer voltage and amps a lot better than copper clad. Copper clad is basically aluminum wire that's just got a copper coating on it, and it's cheaper and it's lighter. That's why you don't want to use copper clad. It's just, it'll get you by, but it sucks. That's why I always say 100% OFC copper, guys. So all the wire used in the factory Nissan vehicle is 100% copper. So therefore, if you look at your fuses, every item that handles some kind of voltage or amp draw is wired up to the fuse box. And when certain things blow, you know, if you blow something, that means you draw too much current. You were pulling way too much current, or you had something touch, or it whatever you had plugged in had an issue and it shorted out, and therefore it pulled too much current and the fuse pops, therefore keeping your factory wiring from glowing red and burning up or causing a fire somewhere else in your vehicle. That's the fail-safe. Let me jump over here to the materials I used real quick. The materials I used for this are 100% copper lugs. A wire goes in there, and basically I didn't go buy a tool that is made to crimp these. It puts pressure right in the middle. What I did was I used the vice grips and I started using it in steps, and I put the part that touches the very center of the vice grip right there over the center, and I start crimping from here to here, from the back to the middle, never up here, because I want to crimp it around here because I've already stuffed all that copper inside. And it works. It just works. You just have to do it in steps. 8-gauge lugs look like this. Now, if you're asking, well, what kind of hole size do we use? These are 1/4-inch holes. The first time I ordered my lugs, I ordered 3/8. 3/8 works. It just means that when you put the bolt through it, it's going to have a little room. But most of the factory bolts, the little 10mm and 12mm factory excuse me, machine screws that are in the Nissan, they have like a factory washer built onto the bottom, or it's flared out, so it's going to have enough meat to grab on top. So it didn't hurt it, and that's just because I wasn't sure. But when I ran out of those, I ordered me a second set, and 1/4-inch, and 1/4-inch is the right size. But every once in a while, you know, you'll have a bolt like on the head. The 3/8 help there. Other than that, you know, the 3/8 right there and on there. But that's okay. So all these copper lugs that I use, these were 3/8 holes. It's no problem though, okay? See what I mean by the factory bolts, how they have a flared out? They flare out at the bottom, so it gives it enough meat to grab the surface, okay? And remember, use the tip of a fold out blade or something. Give a little scratch, you know, on right around the hole. Give a little scratch, clean the paint off, you know, gives it a good contact, because that copper, once it covers it, it doesn't corrode. I've taken them off before, there's no rust. Now when you order some lugs, they're gonna come with heat shrink. Like this one is called DB Works. DB Works, it's its own store, audio website on eBay. You can get them from Sky High Audio, they have their own website, and there's a few other ones. Like I said, I'll put the links. I didn't spend no more than $10 or $12 for a bag of lugs, 0 gauge and 8 gauge. And what these are, guys, these are different. I saw these and I just said, wow, these are cool. These are called crush sleeves. Basically, it's a aluminum tinned copper. So it's really copper, but it's just aluminum tinned. So they put a coating of aluminum on it. Basically, you stick all the wire in there, you shove it in there the best you can, right? Then you stick this in there, because whenever you crank down these Allen heads, right? If you've ever messed with these terminals, right? You'll know that when you crank them down, it starts to turn and it mashes into all that copper. And all it does, it's really just forcing the copper to spread out. But it kind of tears it, it cuts it. Because when you take them out, there's gonna be pieces of copper. So these are called crush lugs. So you stick all that wire in there, then you stick the lug in there, and when you crank down on it, it crushes down into this crush sleeve. Therefore, helping to eliminate all the torn up copper strands in your copper wire that you paid so much money for. So, I don't have any more of the heat shrink of this and that, because I used them all up. Because you can order these with heat shrink or without. These 8 gauge came from DB Works. This was another company. And the 3/8 lugs that I used before, when I did these, I believe it was another company. I have everything saved on my eBay purchase site, so I'll put it up there in the links. I'll put these terminals in the link. I will put the wire that I used, New Concepts. It's spelled, let me see if I can see it. Oh yeah, it's like German, guys. It's KNU, you know, KONCEPTZ.com, newconcepts.com. They're a high quality 100% OFC copper. Sky High sells it. There's some other brands that make it, DB Works. And if you want to do what do you call it, a big 3 or big 4, there's a few sites. Whenever you type it in, if you're an eBay shopper, if you're Amazon, I don't know how they list it. I'm pretty sure the same way. You can type in big 3, like a big 3 wiring kit, and they have some. They're already built. They already come with lugs. They come with a heat shrink. They come all pre-lengthened. But this is a truck. I ordered all my wire in certain length, and I cut it because I wanted to run it the way I wanted to run it, and not, you know, just what they gave me. Now, when they give you enough wire, they give you wire that's probably like this long, you know, left to right, and you'll probably cut some of it. Thing is that, you know, most of the time the lugs will be crimped on there already with a heat shrink, and that shit looks good because it's somebody's already done it. Now, if you order 100% OFC copper, it's a little pricey, you know, but it's good shit. I mean, you get what you pay for. CC, copper clad wire, it's gonna look good, but you can't put all that amps and all that wattage behind it. It's half. It's always gonna be exactly half. So if you ran 0 gauge copper clad wire and you hooked it up to a 3,000 watt amp, yeah, you're only, that wire is gonna start to flex and move when you start putting power through it, because it can only handle so much power. You put 100% copper on there, the wire is not gonna flex, it's not gonna bulge. When you hit it with a lot of current or amperage or wattage, it can handle it, guys. That's why they use 100% copper. Now, where did I run the chassis ground wire, right? You thought I was gonna jump around and forget. Okay, we see the Nissan black and yellow, right? It runs down here. Let me pull it out. I disconnected it just for this video. I'm all like looking for it and shit. Where did I stuff it? Oh yeah, I disconnected it so I can show you. Okay, here it is. This is the 2 gauge factory Nissan wire. You've seen it, you know what it looks like. It's black with a yellow wire. There's my crimping on a 2 gauge. Now obviously this is a 2 gauge, not a 0 gauge, so I had more lug, and that is a 3/8 hole, not a 1/4 inch hole, right? So you see it. I had it, and I found an existing bolt down here, roughly right there where I'm pointing to. There's a bolt right there, or you can drill one, you can tap one in your chassis, your frame, and you know, wherever is best suited for you. But I disconnected it so you can see it, right? See it right there, me tugging on it. So I cut it just to the length where it'll go down, and I have it where it goes on the side of the frame, not on the top but on the side by the steering components. So let me stick this back here. It's not going to arc on anything because it's a ground wire, but you see it's right next to the other ground wire that comes off the battery. So basically I'm grounding the chassis, I'm grounding the cab, the motor, the block, the alternator, and everything else that it's going to touch. So I'm spreading my ground all throughout the vehicle. Better, a lot better, because when you start pulling more amps, more current, right, you need ground. You need a good ground for your ignition system. You need a good ground for all your sensors and all your electrical components to work. And even if you had carbureted, it's still good. It's not going to hurt it. It's custom, it looks good. It adds a bit of redundancy to the factory setup, guys, okay? And this is what since we're done talking about all the ground wire and stuff, I've covered the big 4, right? Negative side goes to the cab, from the cab goes to the frame, and then also comes to the head, back to the back wall chassis. So I followed this stock route, right? Now, remember I was talking about those Ngk wires? They're the real deal. I shortened it. I actually took it off. I cut it apart. It's just like making your own custom race spark plug wires. If you do custom race wires, when they sell them to you in all the same length. They give you all the boots, and you have to cut them all. You have to sleeve them, and you have to put all your boots on there. That way you can custom make it to however your setup or your motor is. Your distributor may be on the front, maybe on the back. Your coil may be in the distributor. It may be mounted externally like the Nissan is right here. It gives you a long enough wire where you can move this around. You can move it back there, move it over here, right here. Anyway, so when you get this kit, it's a 7mm spark plug wire kit. It's very robust, very thick. The silicone is high grade. The insulation is very high grade. And when I took it apart and opened up the clamp that clamps around the little spiral, the little piece that runs inside that transfers the electricity from the coil into the distributor so it can distribute the electricity or the spark so it can go to the spark plugs. It's just like the Mallory race spark plugs or any other high dollar racing spark plugs that I made in the past when I had my Toyota. So when I took it apart, it's like a metal, it looks like an umbilical cord. It's black, it's like a spiral piece of metal, and it's got material on the inside like fiberglass, all highly conductive. And then it has the insulation, which is like a white fiberglass jacket, and then it has the blue insulation, which you see from the outside, basically canceling noise and electrical interference. So it's a true built racing spark plug wire. And I can tell once I opened it up and took it apart, I was like, wow, man, this is not bad. I only wish Ngk had these spark plug wire kits back in the late 90s, early 2000 when I had my my Toyota setup, because it was a full-blown race. Everything was race, you know. 70,000 volt Mallory race coil, custom Mallory race wires. You know, I had the limiter where I can, you know, I can set the spark control on it, even though it's naturally aspirated. But you know what, they didn't, but now they do. But at least they had the Ngk spark plugs, so that was good enough. And I used the hot iridiums. Iridium is an element mined off of rocks in the mountains where supposedly comets from outer space hit the Earth. Just like any other element they find, you know, it's mined on Earth. It is basically like powder coated. It's high heat coating on the tip of the spark plug. It's called iridium. Basically, it just handles heat very well. So they coat the tip, and this allows a spark plug to go through many thousands of miles of use under high compression engines, natural aspirated, turbo, high heat, you name it, guys. That's why they say spark plug intervals are anywhere from 12,000 miles to 20,000 miles. And I used to run them on my sport bikes because they were always available for the sport bikes and sports cars. Then they started manufacturing them for the everyday cars, you know, because their motor started getting better, EFI system started getting better. Therefore, they needed a cleaner burning system that would give a good burn, a good clean burn for emissions, and more power for the motors that aren't turbo or supercharged. So there's the little riddle on the spark plug wires, how good they are. I covered the big four, what we hit, what we cover. I covered the materials. I will put the links on there. Let me upload this, give it a few minutes. I hope you like this video. I hope it helped you out, guys. I tried to find the 2 videos I did where when I actually did all this, I deleted them and I just chunked them because at the time when I did it, it was like, everybody was like, whoa, what the fuck? You know, he normally doesn't do shit like that. He does other stuff. So a few people liked it, not really all that much. But you know what? It is good to know and why you do it, the benefits and the kinds of materials you use. And, you know, I've gone through stormy rain where water has come over the hood. I've gone through water where it went up in the engine compartment. Normally, my electrical system would probably fail if it was stock, but it didn't because I had a good grounding system. And for all you guys that pound the ground, that you have airbags or hydraulics, you're body dropped or not body dropped, and you're dragging frame, throwing sparks and shit, it's good to have this extra grounding for if you do shit like that. It's just good in general. And it's an audio type upgrade. It always has been, but at the same time, it upgrades your whole factory electrical system, power and ground. They call it the big 3 for cars. I call it the big 4 for trucks. All right, guys, it's been a good video. I hope it helped you. Thanks. Peace.